The spaceship landed softly on the war-torn surface of a human planet. Its metallic frame gleamed in the harsh light of the alien sun. The planet, once full of life, was now covered in scars, ruins of cities that had been destroyed by constant conflict. Alien ships often passed by, but this was the first time one had stopped to investigate. The aliens that stepped out of the ship were tall, strong, and intimidating, their armor gleaming and their weapons ready. Their mission was clear: assess humanity and decide if they were a threat to the galaxy. Among the aliens was Commander Risa, a high-ranking officer of her race, known for her ruthless decision-making and sharp mind. Her species had conquered many worlds, and they believed that they could control any force, no matter how dangerous. But there was something about humanity that intrigued her. They were small, fragile, and had no real power in comparison to the vast empires across the galaxy. And yet, they had survived, again and again. The humans had been waiting for them, brought together in a makeshift camp. Their eyes were filled with fear, but also something else's determination. They had faced threats before, and they would face this one as well. Risa's eyes scanned the humans, looking for weaknesses. She had seen them tremble under the pressure of her presence, but one human stood out from the rest. He was young, barely, in his 20s, with short brown hair and a tired expression. His name was David. He didn't look special. In fact, he seemed almost ordinary compared to the hardened warriors around him. But there was something in his posture, something in the way he looked directly at her without any sign of fear. Puzzled Risa, she was used to seeing fear. It was a natural response to the unknown, to the powerful, to something like her. Yet David wasn't afraid. Our HYSSA approached him, her footsteps heavy with authority. The other humans stepped back, but David stood his ground. She towered over him, her expression cold, but her eyes were full of curiosity. He didn't look like he was trying to act tough or put on a show. There was no bravado in his stance, just calmness. This only deepened Risa's curiosity. She had expected him to tremble, to bow his head, to beg for mercy. But instead, he simply stared at her. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" she asked, her voice low and commanding. David looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, there was silence between them, and the tension in the air seemed to stretch, but David's eyes never wavered. Then, slowly, he spoke. "Because I've seen fear before," he said simply. Risa's brows furrowed. She had expected him to say something like, "I'm not afraid of you," or "You don't scare me." But his answer was different. Defiance. It wasn't bravado. It was as if he had already accepted fear as part of his life. As though fear was something that no longer held power over him. "Seen fear?" She repeated, now even more intrigued. "What does that mean?" David didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around at the other humans, their eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. He could see their hands shaking, their faces pale. But in this moment, he knew that they were all hiding their true emotions behind masks of courage. He had been taught to do the same for most of his life, but now, standing before this alien, he realized something important. Fear didn't have to control them, not anymore. "I've seen it in my family," David said finally, his voice soft but steady. "In the wars we fought, the battles we lost, fear became a part of who we were. We learned to carry it with us, but we also learned to fight through it. That's what makes us human, I think. We don't give up because we're afraid. We fight because of it." Risa was silent. She had never heard anything like this before. Fear for her people was a weapon, a tool to control others, a way to dominate and break their enemies. But David's words made her think. Was this what made humanity so different? The fact that they didn't crumble under the weight of fear? Was this what had allowed them to survive the impossible? Risa's mind raced as she studied him. There was no fear in his eyes, only strength and resolve. She had expected him to be weak, but in that moment she saw something far more dangerous than physical power. She saw a mind that had been shaped by the harshest of circumstances, a spirit that had endured the unimaginable. She took a step back, still not fully understanding what had just transpired between them. "You're different from the others," she said quietly. "Why?" David hesitated, then spoke again, his voice more earnest now. Because I've seen what happens when you let fear control you. It can destroy you. But if you learn to face it, to accept it, you become stronger. He paused, letting his words sink in. That's what we do. We face fear. Every single day. Risa stood there for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. She had expected to find a weak, fearful species easy to conquer and manipulate. But instead, she was facing something far more complex. David wasn't afraid, and neither were the humans around him, even if they tried to hide it. This realization started to stir something deep inside her, something she couldn't explain. She turned to her soldiers, who had been watching the exchange, and ordered them to take the humans to a holding area. But her mind was still on David. She had never encountered a species like this before, one that faced fear head-on, that used it as fuel to fight. She wasn't sure yet what it meant, but something in her gut told her that these humans were not to be underestimated. David watched as Risa walked away, his mind swirling with thoughts of what had just happened. He had never expected to have this kind of conversation with an alien. But in that moment, he realized something else there was a strange connection between them now. It wasn't friendship, and it wasn't trust. But there was an understanding, a recognition of the strength that lay in facing fear. And for the first time, he felt as though they were not so different after all. The days after the first encounter were tense. Risa couldn't shake the image of David from her mind. She had seen fear in many forms, from trembling soldiers to defeated leaders, but never in a human like him. His calmness was unsettling, especially for someone from a species that thrived on control and dominance. The way he had spoken about fear, how humanity faced it every day, had shaken her beliefs. Risa decided that she needed to understand more about this human. If he was truly different from the others, there had to be a reason. Perhaps through a series of tests, she could understand what made humans so resilient. She wasn't sure yet if she was impressed or annoyed by this quality, but she couldn't deny that it intrigued her. The next morning, David was brought to the testing grounds, a massive arena surrounded by high walls. Risa stood at the edge, watching as David was escorted in. The arena was designed for physical trials battles, combat simulations, and endurance tests. The alien soldiers had trained for years to survive the harshest conditions, to face danger without hesitation. Today, they would see if David could endure the same. David stood at the center of the arena, his eyes scanning the area. He knew the tests were coming, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced much worse in the past, as the sounds of the crowd watching from above didn't bother him. He had learned long ago to block out distractions. His focus was sharp, and he was ready. Risa stood on the elevated platform, her arms crossed, watching with a calculating gaze. "Let's see if your fearlessness is just talk," she muttered under her breath. The first challenge came quickly. A massive mechanical creature was released into the arena, its eyes glowing red and its claws sharp. It was a battle-hardened machine, designed to overwhelm and crush any opponent. The soldiers who had fought it before had barely survived. Yet David didn't flinch when it roared and charged toward him. He stepped to the side at the last moment, his movements swift and precise. La. The creature stumbled, momentarily disoriented. David didn't hesitate, sprinted toward it, dodging its wild swings and using his agility to his advantage. Risa watched, a hint of respect creeping into her thoughts. David was fast, far quicker than she had expected. He dodged the creatures. Attack again and again, his eyes focused, his body moving like he had done it 100 times before. Finally, with a sharp move, he leapt onto the creature's back and managed to disable its main power source. The machine froze, lifeless dot. The crowd cheered, but Risa remained silent. She hadn't expected him to win, but she wasn't surprised. What she couldn't understand was how he had done it without any visible fear. The creature had been enormous, and yet David had faced it head-on. He hadn't run, he hadn't hesitated. The next test was even more intense. Risa called for a combat simulation this time, pitting David against a group of 4 trained alien soldiers. They were faster, stronger, and more experienced in battle. David was outnumbered, but he didn't show any sign of concern. The soldiers charged at him from all sides, But David's movements were fluid. He didn't try to overpower them. Instead, he used their momentum against them. A quick twist here, a well-placed kick there. Risa could see that David was learning from each encounter, adapting quickly to the strengths and weaknesses of his opponents. He fought with precision, his focus never wavering. The battle wasn't about strength, it was about strategy. It was about understanding the fear of defeat and pushing past it. And that was exactly what David did. The soldiers were impressive, but none of them could land a blow on him. One by one, they were taking down David's agility and quick thinking, overwhelming their superior strength. When the last soldier hit the ground, the arena went silent. David stood there, breathing heavily, but still standing tall. Risa's mind raced. She had never seen a human perform like this. He wasn't just a soldier. He was something else, a force that couldn't be easily defined. His ability to stay calm under pressure, his uncanny reflexes, and his refusal to give in to fear made him an extraordinary adversary. As the tests continued, David kept surprising her. Each challenge was met with the same calmness, the same determination. He wasn't perfect. He didn't win every time, but he never backed down. He didn't allow fear to control him, and that was something Risa couldn't ignore. It was clear. Now David was different. Humanity as a whole had potential that she hadn't understood until now. When the final test came, Risa decided to push David to his limits. She ordered a trial that involved an obstacle course, one that had broken the spirits of many alien soldiers before. It was a maze of deadly traps, with moving walls, laser beams, and sudden falls. Most would have panicked after just one obstacle, but David seemed to take it in stride. He moved through the maze with a determination that left Risa speechless. At one point, he even had to jump across a gap that was nearly 10 meters wide. The moment before he jumped, Risa saw something, just a flash of hesitation in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. David leaped across the gap with ease, landing perfectly on the other side. He didn't waste time celebrating. He just kept moving forward, his eyes focused on the next challenge. Risa felt a mix of admiration and confusion. The humans were not the weak, fragile creatures she had assumed they were. They had strength that came not from muscle, but from something far deeper. When David finally reached the end of the course, he stood there, panting and exhausted but victorious. Risa didn't speak at first. She simply stared at him, taking in everything she had just witnessed. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. "You've passed," she said finally, her voice low but sincere. "You have proven that humans are far more than we gave them credit for." David nodded, though he didn't smile. "I didn't come here to prove anything to you," he said. "I'm just trying to survive. But if that's enough for you, then I guess I've passed." Risa studied him closely. He wasn't boasting. He wasn't looking for praise. He was just stating the truth. And for the first time, Risa wondered if humanity was the true test for the galaxy. If the galaxy could survive what David had shown her. If humanity's strength, its ability to face fear and push forward, was something that could change the entire course of history. The arena had fallen silent after the tests. Risa couldn't stop thinking about David's performance. She had seen countless warriors from her species, but none had impressed her like this human. He had faced every challenge without hesitation, without fear, and with a calmness that was almost unnatural. The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was something deeper at work here. The alien commander had seen her soldiers fight through training simulations, watched as they overcame obstacles designed to break them. But none had shown the resilience David had. None had faced challenges with the same steady resolve. As David was led away from the arena, Risa found herself unable to look away. She ordered her soldiers to prepare a secure meeting room. She had to speak to him, to understand why he was different. There had to be an explanation, something more than just good training or luck. She needed to know what made this human so fearless. David was escorted into the room, his face calm, though sweat still clung to his brow. His eyes met Risa's, and there was no fear, there only curiosity and perhaps a touch of exhaustion. He sat down without being told, as if he had already accepted that This was just another part of the trial. But Risa wasn't going to make him wait. "You're different from the others," she began, her voice softer now, as though she had lowered her guard. "You fought like no human I've ever seen. You faced fear, danger, and didn't hesitate. Tell me why. What makes you so... resilient?" David leaned back in his chair, looking at her with steady eyes. His expression remained neutral, but there was a depth to his gaze that made Risa uneasy. It was as if he had seen the darkest parts of the universe and had come out stronger for it. "I've seen fear," he said simply. "Not just in others. I've felt it myself, deep in my bones. But you learn to live with it." Risa waited for him to continue, intrigued by the simplicity of his answer. "What do you mean by that?" David's gaze dropped for a moment, as though he was recalling something painful, something from his past. He wasn't sure if he should share it, but the commander's question seemed to demand an answer. He let out a slow breath before speaking again. "My family fought in wars that seemed impossible to win. I've watched people break under pressure, watched friends and soldiers fall. Fear was always there, lurking behind every decision, every battle. It got to the point where I realized that fear wasn't something you could get rid of. It's something you have to face, accept, and use." Risa didn't interrupt him. She just listened, her mind processing what he was saying. He spoke as though facing fear was something normal, something that everyone went through, something that everyone had to conquer. Risa had never thought of fear this way. For her species, fear was something to dominate, something to suppress. In others, but David's words were different. He wasn't afraid of fear. He had learned how to live with it, to fight despite it. David looked up again, meeting her gaze. "Humans have learned to accept fear. We know it. We understand it. And that's why we can face things that seem impossible. We've been through enough to know that fear is part of us. It doesn't control us. Control how we respond to it." Risa felt a strange stir in her chest. She had always seen fear as a weakness, something to be conquered in order to maintain control. Yet here was this human, a soldier, who was telling her that fear wasn't something to be feared at. It was a part of life. It was something you could embrace, something that made you stronger. "I don't understand," Risa admitted, her voice quieter than before. "You mean to say that fear doesn't control you? That you use it as... a weapon?" "Slowly, in a way, yes. Fear reminds us that we're alive, that we have something to lose. But it also reminds us that we can fight for what matters. We've been through enough wars, enough battles, to understand that. Fear becomes a part of us, and when you accept it, you learn to fight through it." Risa was silent for a long moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had never truly thought about fear in this way. She had always believed it was something to avoid, something to push down. She had seen her species conquer worlds with power, with strength, with domination. But here, in this human, she saw something that made her question everything she thought she knew. Humans didn't fear fear itself. They used it, made it a part of their strategy. "I don't understand," Risa said again, this time more softly. "How can you live like that, knowing that fear is always there, lurking?" David's answer came after a long pause. "Because we know that fear isn't the end. It's just the beginning. It's what you do with it that matters." Risa felt something stir within her. There was something in David's words that made her question everything. Her species had always believed that power came from dominance, from fear. But here was a human who had learned to conquer fear without ever needing to dominate it. That was a strength in itself. That was why David, and by extension, humanity, were so dangerous. The room was still. Risa felt as though she were seeing everything through a new lens. David wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a human. He was a symbol of something that she had overlooked, kind of strength she hadn't known existed. "You're right," she said quietly. "I think I understand now." David gave her a small nod. "It's not easy, but we've learned to live with it. That's what makes us different. Fear doesn't make us weak. It makes us stronger. We fight because of it." Risa stared at him, her mind swirling with the implications of what he had just said. She had come here to assess humanity, to determine whether they were a threat. But now, she found herself questioning everything she knew about strength, about power, and about what it truly meant to conquer. David's answer had changed something in her. She didn't know yet what that meant for the future, but she knew one thing for sure. The humans were not to be underestimated. The days that followed David's revelations were filled with tension. Risa could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. His views on fear and humanity's ability to live with it had changed something inside her, something that was hard to ignore. The humans were not the weak, helpless creatures she had thought them to be. They had a strength that was different, yet undeniable. And now she had a choice to make. Her mission, ordered by the Galaxy Council, had been simple. Assess the human race and decide if they were a threat. If they were too dangerous, the decision was to wipe them out before they could become a real force in the galaxy. It was a strategy that had worked for her species for generations. But now, after spending time with David and seeing what humans were capable of, she wasn't so sure anymore. Risa sat alone in her command room, staring out at the stars. The dark expanse of space seemed to mock her indecision. She had always been certain of her decisions. As a commander, she had learned to trust her instincts, to trust the strength of her species. But now, her instincts were conflicted. The humans were unlike anything she had ever encountered. They were driven by fear, yes, but it wasn't something that controlled them. They used it as fuel, as motivation. That made them dangerous, more dangerous than any alien race she had ever faced. She stood up, pacing the room. Her soldiers had completed their reports, detailing their encounters with the humans, but none of them seemed to understand what she had come to realize. They saw the humans as weak, insignificant. They couldn't understand that the true power of humanity lay in their ability to face the impossible, to rise against overwhelming odds. They didn't know what it meant to fight through fear every day. Risa's communicator beeped, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from the Galaxy Council, the higher authority that had given her the task of evaluating humanity. Commander. Risa, the voice crackled over the line. We have received your preliminary report. We expect your decision on the human species. Is humanity a threat, or can they be controlled? Risa's heart skipped a beat. The question was direct, as it always had been, but for the first time, she hesitated. What if the Council's strategy was wrong? What if they didn't understand what she had learned? I'm still gathering more information, she replied, her voice steady, but with a hint of uncertainty. She couldn't hide. I need more time. Time. The voice on the other end was sharp. We've given you plenty of time, Commander. We expect results. You must act swiftly. A decision must be made. Risa's fingers tightened around the communicator. Pressure was mounting. She knew what the Council expected, what they demanded, but she also knew what was at stake. The fate of humanity was now in her hands, and it was a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. She ended the transmission and sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The humans had already proven themselves more resilient than any species she had ever encountered. But were they a threat? Could they be controlled? Or would they eventually rise up and challenge the power of the galaxy? Risa had seen how the humans fought, how they moved through their world with grit and determination. But she had also seen their weaknesses, their visions, their fear, their uncertainty. They were not perfect, and they still had much to learn. But they had something that no other species had: an unbreakable spirit. It was then that Risa made a decision. She would not follow the Council's orders. She couldn't. The humans deserved a chance to prove themselves, to grow. They deserved a chance to show the galaxy that they were more than just a species to be feared and controlled. But it wouldn't be easy. She would have to act quickly. The Council would not accept defiance, not from someone of her rank. But Risa could not stand by and let them make a mistake that would doom humanity. She stood up, her mind made up. There was no turning back now. David was waiting in a holding cell when Risa arrived. She had told her soldiers to bring him to her quarters, but she hadn't given them an explanation. She knew that the others would question her decision and perhaps even see her as weak for not following the council's orders. But she didn't care. Not anymore. David looked up as she entered, his expression calm but expectant. He knew she had been thinking about what to do next. There was a strange silence between them, one that neither of them wanted to break. The weight of their conversation earlier hung heavily in the air. "I've made a decision," Risa said finally, her voice steady. "I've decided that humanity deserves a chance. I won't follow the Council's orders to destroy your species. I'm going to offer you an alliance." David's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't speak right away. He had expected many things, but not this. "An alliance?" he asked cautiously. "Why?" "Because I've learned something," she said, stepping closer to him. "I've learned that humans are capable of much more than we ever gave you credit for. We face fear with strength, not weakness. Fight through it. That makes you stronger than any of us could ever understand." David's heart raced, but he remained composed. "You've seen what we can do, but can you trust us?" he asked. "We've been at war for so long, and we've made plenty of mistakes. How can you trust us after everything?" Risa's gaze softened. "Because I believe in your potential. I believe that, if given the chance, you can do more than just survive. You can change this galaxy." David took a deep breath. He had never expected this kind of offer, but he knew it was the right one. This was a moment that could shape everything. Future of humanity, the future of the galaxy. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "I won't let humanity down." Risa nodded, her mind now focused on what lay ahead. The Council would not be pleased, but she had made her choice. She believed in humanity's ability to rise above the odds, to face whatever came next. The days that followed Risa's decision were filled with uncertainty. She had chosen to defy the orders of the Galaxy Council, an act of rebellion that could cost her everything. The Council demanded control, demanded power, and they had always believed that humanity would be a threat. But Risa had seen something different in David, something different in humans as a whole. They were resilient, adaptable, and most importantly, they were capable of change. She had made a choice, and now she had to face the consequences. David was still processing the gravity of what had just happened. He had expected to be treated like an enemy, like the humans always were when they encountered alien species. But here he was, standing side by side with Risa, someone who had chosen to believe in humanity's potential rather than its destruction. It was surreal, but it was real. The commander had put her trust in him, and that trust was something he couldn't take lightly. The alliance wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity could rise above its past, above its fears, and show the galaxy what they were capable of. Risa led David to a secure chamber, one that was carefully hidden from the rest of her crew. The walls were thick, the lighting dim, but the room held a certain quiet strength. The kind of strength she had begun to see in David, the kind of strength she now hoped would spread throughout the galaxy. "We'll need to make preparations," Risa said, her voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "The Council won't take kindly to this. If they find out what I've done, we'll both be in danger." David nodded, his face serious. "I understand. We don't have much time." "What's the plan?" Risa glanced at a console on the far wall and activated a holographic map of the galaxy. "We have several outposts and colonies in this region. If we're going to make this work, we need to unify humanity. I can't do it alone, and neither can you. We'll need to reach out to other human colonies, bring them together, show them what we can accomplish if we stand as one." David studied the map. It wasn't a simple task. There were many factions, many divided groups scattered across the galaxy. But he knew what Risa was saying was true. The strength of humanity lay in their unity. They had to come together or face destruction. The galaxy would never accept them as individuals, but as a united force, they might stand a chance. "I'll do whatever it takes," David said. "We'll need to show them that this is real. That we're not just fighting to survive, but fighting to change the galaxy." Risa nodded. "Exactly. But we need to move quickly. The Council will be suspicious. If they find out we've made contact with any other humans, it will be too late. They continued to discuss their strategy. David couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility weighing on him. The human race had always been divided, fractured by wars and political differences. Could he really be the one to unite them? Could Risa's belief in humanity be enough to bring them together? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew. One thing for sure, he couldn't let Risa down. Not after everything she had risked for them. Days turned into weeks as they prepared for the journey ahead. Risa's ship was fast, built for reconnaissance and quick strikes. But now it was repurposed for something else, a mission to reach humanity's distant colonies, to spread the message of unity, and to prove that they were more than just a threat. They were a force to be reckoned with, a force that could change the fate of the galaxy. Risa and David spent hours discussing strategy, learning about each other's strengths and weaknesses. David found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He spoke about his past, about the battles he had fought in, the people he had lost. He spoke about his family, about the sacrifices they had made. And Risa listened, not as a commander giving orders, but as someone who understood what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. But there was still doubt in David's mind. Would humanity be able to unite? Could they really put aside their differences long enough to face the real threat, the one that Risa had warned him about? The galaxy had been divided for so long. The idea of bringing so many different human factions together seemed impossible, but every time he looked at Risa, he saw the same thing she had seen in him, the potential for something greater. She had chosen to believe in humanity, to believe in his ability to lead. Now, it was time for him to prove her right. The ship set off in the dead of night, the stars stretching out before them like an endless sea. The crew was small, but Risa had chosen carefully. She trusted them, and in return, they trusted her. There was no going back now. The council would eventually find out what they were doing, but by then, it might be too late for them to stop it. As the ship hurtled through the stars, David stood by the window, staring out at the vastness of space. He had been to many places, seen many worlds, but this one felt different. This time, he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. He was fighting for humanity's future, for the future of the galaxy. "Are you ready?" Risa asked, her voice calm but with a sense of purpose. David turned to her, his face serious. "I am." Risa gave him a small nod, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. "Then let's make history." As the ship continued its journey through the unknown, both of them understood the risks they were taking. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were on the verge of something great. The path ahead would be difficult, and the challenges would be many. But for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The journey through space had been long and uncertain. Risa and David had traveled to several human colonies, some of them barely holding on to life after years of conflict and isolation. Each new colony they visited brought its own set of challenges. Many were skeptical, distrustful of the idea of unity, and even more so of the alliance with an alien commander. They had been on their own for so long that the idea of cooperating with anyone, let alone an alien, was difficult to accept. But Risa had a way of speaking, of convincing people that they had a chance to rise above their past mistakes. She spoke with authority, but also with empathy, and David stood by her side, proving that humanity was not just willing to listen, they were ready to fight for something greater. With each successful alliance, they grew closer to their goal, to unite humanity under a common cause. David had learned much about Risa over the weeks. She was more than just a warrior. She had lived through the challenges of her own people, faced their own wars, and yet she had chosen to stand by him. It was a strange partnership, one that seemed almost impossible. But in the vast emptiness of space, surrounded by millions of stars, they had found something that neither of them had expected: hope. But hope alone wouldn't be enough to win the war that was coming. As they neared the final colony, a distant outpost on the edge of known space, Risa could feel the tension growing. The council had undoubtedly been watching her every move. She had already broken one of their most important laws by forming an alliance with humanity, and now She was about to make contact with more colonies. The decision to help humanity wasn't one she took lightly, and she knew there would be consequences. But she couldn't go back now. The future of the galaxy depended on this. "We're getting close," Risa said, her voice calm but with a hint of urgency. "This is the final colony. We can get their support. We'll have enough strength to challenge the Council. But they won't make it easy. They've been isolated for too long." David nodded, his face serious. "We've faced worse," he said quietly. "But we can't do this alone." Risa turned to him. "That's why we need you. The humans will listen to you. You have something they can't ignore. You've shown them what it means to fight for something bigger than themselves." David didn't respond at first. He knew what Risa was saying was true. But the weight of the responsibility was starting to settle on his shoulders. He had never asked to be a leader. He had only wanted to survive, to protect those he cared about. But now, he found himself standing at the forefront of a revolution. As the person who could change the course of history. The ship docked at the colony, and David and Risa made their way to the meeting hall. The air was thick with anticipation. The humans here had seen their fair share of hardships. They weren't eager to trust outsiders, especially after years of isolation. As they entered the hall, a group of local leaders stood waiting, their faces stern and unreadable. "Commander Risa," one of the leaders said, his voice low but steady, "we were told you were bringing a message of peace. We've seen what your kind is capable of. What makes you think we should trust you?" Risa stepped forward, her posture straight, her voice clear. "You don't have to trust me," she said. "But you do have to trust him." She pointed to David, who stood beside her, his expression calm but resolute. "He represents what humanity is capable of. He's the one who can unite your people, and he's the one who can lead you to something better." The room fell silent as the leaders looked at David. There was no anger in their eyes, just doubt. They didn't know what to make of this human who had stood beside an alien commander, an act that many of them saw as treason. He stepped forward and addressed the group. "I know you don't trust me. I don't expect." "You too," he began. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to show you what we can do together. I've seen what happens when we fight alone. It never ends well. But I've also seen what happens when we stand together, when we face the impossible side by side. I've seen fear, I've seen pain, but I've also seen hope. And that hope is what will drive us to fight. It's not for survival, but for something greater." The room was still as his words hung in the air. David could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about making an alliance. This was about proving that humanity wasn't just a race of survivors, but a race that could change the galaxy. He had no more words to say. He had shown them the truth. Now, it was up to them to decide. Finally, one of the leaders stepped forward, his face unreadable. "We've fought for too long to trust anyone," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But what you say? It speaks to something inside us. We've forgotten what it means to have hope, to fight for something bigger than ourselves. Maybe it's time we remembered." The tension in the room lifted as the leader extended his hand to David. "We will stand with you." Raced, but he took the leader's hand firmly, a silent promise passing between them. This was the moment. The moment when humanity could rise, not just as individuals, but as a united force. Risa watched quietly, her heart swelling with pride. She had made the right choice. The humans had proven their strength. And now, they had the strength to change the galaxy. With this final alliance, Risa and David had done what many had thought impossible. They had united humanity, and together, they would face whatever the future held. The Council might still come for them, but now, humanity was ready. They were no longer alone.